Hi there. My name is Lisa Haneberg, and uh, I've been a business author, a consultant, and fiction writer. And my most recent book is called Far from Ordinary. The subtitle is Predicaments, Misadventures, and Illuminations. And happiness to me is living an adventurous life every day in small and big ways.
I love that, Lisa. Small and big ways. And this book is full of small and big ways, which is
Mhm.
super fun. So tell me more about some of the small ways that you're experiencing happiness, maybe today or this week.
Yeah, so for me, every day I ask myself, what could make this day more adventurous for me? And in somewhat, I'm doing a lot with writing in new formats and genres. I'm writing an auto fiction story right now, which means it's a fictional story, but I'm the protagonist. So I've put myself, and you can be heroic, you can be anything, so that's like a literary adventure. And then of course for me, like you've mentioned how daily walks and that are very important to you. I like to explore different areas each time, and I find that my mind just explodes with new creative ideas that will fuel whatever I'm working on, whether it's a business project or a fun project or a gardening project. So it's an everyday question I ask myself at the very beginning, even if I might have appointments and doctors and whatever. And sometimes it can only be 10 minutes, and sometimes I can spend 2 hours. So that's how I try to approach it.
That's awesome. Well, today, my big adventure is I get to talk to you, and I'm
Me too.
delighted.
Me
Right?
too.
This is awesome. So you were one of the first management authors that I got connected with, and I read all your stuff on management craft, and then you came to Milwaukee. So let's talk a little bit about the bicycle tour, right? By bicycle, I mean motorcycle tour with your friend Hazel. Do you still have Hazel, by the way?
No, I don't. I don't. There was a period of years where I wasn't writing as much. It was right after my cancer diagnosis. Just didn't have the mental capability to keep taking care of it. If anyone has a motorcycle, if you don't ride it regularly, it is more hassle than it is worth, because you have to re-up it every time. So she wasn't getting the road time she needed to be a healthy, steel steed. And so I actually donated her to a nonprofit,
Oh, wow. Wow,
but
wow,
I miss
wow.
her.
So yeah, I bet you do. Well, let's talk about that trip because that was that talk about an adventure. When you wrote what is it, 2 weeks to a breakthrough, you had the palm frond that was pointing upwards for growth and all of that, and you decided to go on a motorcycle tour across the country. And
Yeah,
so talk to us a little bit about what kind of the thought process in that, because you wrote a little bit about Hazel in the book.
quite a
So
bit.
talk to
Yeah.
me about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was actually shortly after my mother died, and my mother died unexpectedly. And whenever you have those things happen, you kind of have those carpe diem moments. And so 2 weeks later, I bought Hazel the motorcycle. And even though I had ridden a motorcycle in younger life, more because I couldn't afford a car, like when I lived in Tampa and that, this time I bought a motorcycle because I knew I wanted to adventure. And I'm a recluse, I'm an introvert. And so I like doing things on my own. So I bought Hazel, which was a purple sort of cruiser Honda bike. And, and I rode her around. We lived in Seattle at the time, rode her around, all that kind of stuff. And I got the idea when it was about time that 2 weeks to a breakthrough was going to come out, to do a motorcycle book tour. And of course, my publisher hated that idea. I wasn't going to support it because it's like a stupid waste of resources to go around the country to do all these things. And by the way, I've never ridden a motorcycle more than 40 miles when I got onto the tour. But what I did was, at the time, I had my blog, Management Craft, which shows the power of building an audience before you need it. At the time, I had 17,000 subscribers, which today doesn't seem like a lot, but in 1994, it was more. It was a decent sized audience for a management blog, no less, right? So I actually went out to my management blog readers and said, if I do this thing, this road trip, this book tour. Um, and if I came to your city, would you help me get, the book readings and all that kind of stuff populated with your friends? Because I didn't know where to go, but I knew I should go where the energy was. And the energy was with the audience that I had already cultivated and created, the readers who seemed to like my content, etc. And so I just put that out there. And I thought, well, if nobody responds, I'm not going to do it. Well, a bunch of people responded. It was so awesome. And what's interesting is every time I got a response, I actually put a pin in the map. And that's where I went. And although there were a couple other places I added because I thought I should have, I now regret that, because you want to go where the energy is. And so I did 3 talks in Fargo, North Dakota, because that's where the energy was. And there was over 50 people in there. And then I actually got to ride my motorcycle into the building in Grand Junction with another contact. And of course, then I went to Milwaukee, and you were there and you helped as well. And so I ended up doing 9,400 miles over 40 days through 38 states. And that was cool.
Wow. That was cool.
Yeah.
That was cool. And I think about the impact that you made, because you solidified a lot of those online relationships with that tour. And no doubt, right, that one-to-one. And talk about an adventure, right? 9,400 miles. So what was your big takeaway from that, Lisa? What was your big learning, your big illumination, if you will?
So one is, I know for me, it's not going to be the same for everybody. I know that for me, that my secret to success from an adventure standpoint is to commit before I know if I can do it. If you wait until you know if you can do it, or you've done practice runs, etc. I committed when I'd driven no more than 40 miles on my motorcycle. And the day I took off from Seattle to go down to Portland, so 200 miles, and it was raining sideways that first day. I almost quit that first day, but it was raining sideways. The day I took off, I still hadn't gone more than 40 miles. And so for me, it's to commit and then to make it happen. So
I love that. I love that. Commit before you know that you can make it happen. That's great advice for all of us, because commitment is what powers you through, as opposed to just compliance. Like, I knew I should do this. I mean, you mentioned that with the book tour, that these are some of the cities I should hit, but now looking back, these are not the cities that where the energy was. So with that, you're writing fiction now as well, which I absolutely love. Your Toxic Octopus is one of my favorite fiction novels, and I don't read much fiction, I'm just going to tell you, but your stuff always makes me think and like, that's different, right? That's interesting. That's a new adventure. So what took you from management to fiction, Lisa? Or did you always write fiction and you have a pen name?
No, I didn't. And even when I was writing management craft, as you know, one of the reasons why I think the people who read it liked it is that it was an informal, open, positive, often funny take. Still had solid advice, research practices, really good examples of what to do or not do when you're in a management role. But it was served up with some humor and informality and a more conversational style. And I always wanted to do that. And what's interesting was, and this was when you think about 2004, 2005 is when my first management book came out. I published about 14 straightforward nonfiction books. And that was sort of, I would call it the height of the remarketing time in books. So this is when you had people saying, here's time management tips. And then the next book would be time management tips for women. And then the next book would be time management tips for millennials. And the next book would be time management tips for those nearing retirement. And it was all like 99% exactly the same, but it had some sort of iteration. And because that was working in the marketplace, the publishers and that I was working with, that's really what they were interested in for me. So I'd written a book for middle management, and then they wanted to do another version, which was middle management for public sector managers, which I did do, because that is a significant enough difference. But the things that people were interested in was kind of the same. And I was like, you know what? That doesn't bode with my life should be adventure and misadventure. And so I decided to enter an MFA program so I could become a better writer. And I wanted to hang around novelists, poets, and all those, still writing nonfiction. But then it occurred to me, I should try my hand, because from what I liked to read was I like to read quirky mysteries for pleasure. And I thought, I should try my hand at one of these. But you will notice that my protagonist was a former HR person. So it's not
Yep.
so it was my time. I'd been in, doing HR roles and organizations and that. And of course I'd seen all the good, bad, and the very, very ugly of corporate life. And I thought I could use some of these stories and fictionalize them a little bit. And a lot of the things are sort of based on what I really experienced, investigating scumbags in the corporate environment. So I had this sort of fertile ground I could use, and that's what made it possible for me to make that switch.
Right. So it was fiction, but not quite, right?
Right. Right.
That's fun. So New Mexico now, right? Is New Mexico home, or where's home, Lisa?
Yes, I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I actually lived in Albuquerque 20 some years ago. It's where my husband and I first met. Uh, New Mexico was the first place I ever moved for the place. Prior to that, I was doing what a lot of people do for work is, you get a call from a recruiter saying, hey, we're looking for the next thing or whatever. And so I would always move where the job was. And, I lived in Chillicothe, Ohio, and Washington, D.C., and, lots of different places for work. And it was, it was kind of in my mid 40s. And I thought, I want to move where I want to move. And I've always loved New Mexico. And so I looked for a job in New Mexico, and I actually found one at Intel. So I was very lucky in that they relocated me there. Loved it. Met my husband. We got married. And I made the mistake of asking a question. I actually mentioned it in the book of when we were on the plane for our honeymoon to Italy. We did a biking trip in Tuscany for our honeymoon. There's all those hours you got to like entertain each other or do whatever. And he's an even bigger introvert than I am. So there was no conversation occurring. It was our honeymoon. So I thought, okay, being a facilitator, I'll facilitate the conversation. And so I asked them the following question: if you could be anywhere doing anything, any kind of work, where would you be and what would you be doing? Now, I didn't expect this question to be catalytic in any way. And he said, I'd like to have my own consulting company in Seattle. I was like, oh, didn't expect that, right? So not only had he never told me that he had a secret dream of opening his own consulting company, but he never mentioned Seattle. And I've never been to Seattle. But in that moment, going back to our earlier conversation, commit and then figure out how to do it. Actually, on the plane, I said, well, why don't we just do that? And so I actually made some inquiries and applied for a job at Amazon.com, and Amazon.com moved us to Seattle. So, and then we moved around a bit, but, we're both, my husband just retired. He still does consulting. And we decided, well, where do we want to be? And we had, even after we left New Mexico, we came back for vacations every year. And that tells us where we need to be. We just love it here. Their adventures are everywhere.
So what's your favorite part about Albuquerque? Is it the balloon festival, or what do you love there the most?
I love the balloon festival, but it wouldn't even rank in the top 10. For me, it's the big sky and exploring the high desert. And so, for example, the housing community, we're in a HOA 55 plus neighborhood, and that sounds awful, but it butts up against the Petroglyph National Monument. And so in 5 minutes, we're walking amongst petroglyphs and dormant volcanoes that also have coyotes, cougars, rattlesnakes, um, uh, what are the big furry spiders? Tarantulas, mating season, scorpions. It's an adventure. And of course, we share the land with them and learning about all of them and all the plants and all the cacti and everything. I'm a big nature girl. And the sky is just so big here. I love New Mexican food, red and green chili on everything. And I love the fact that this is such a diverse culture from the standpoint we have 21 sovereign nations in terms of indigenous peoples. We have Mexican, Spanish, South American, which are all a little different, large communities, and so the food and the culture and all the opportunities to explore are amazing. And Albuquerque is kind of like a good home base where you can, in just 30, 40, 50 minutes, an hour or two, get to, Santa Fe, Taos, all the more iconic places.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So sounds like there is lots of adventure, which makes it a
Hmm.
place that I need to visit too. So
Yes, you should
that's pretty
come.
cool.
You should come.
Absolutely. Well, you talk about in the book, Lisa, you talk about the cacti there. You talk about the saguaro and how it is both strong and powerful, as well as very, very fragile. And I think that's a good metaphor for kind of how life is, huh?
Yeah, right. And in particular, how everything's connected. So, one of the things that most endangers the saguaro is um, that it is so tender particularly when it's younger, of being washed away because its roots are shallow. So you have these huge towering things that have fairly shallow roots and can be washed away pretty quickly, especially when they're young. And so it's all about, how do you get set up right? How do you make sure you don't screw up what you've got going for you? For example, with a saguaro, it knows where the sun is and it develops thicker skin on that side. If you were to transplant it and twist it, its tender skin on the other side would get burnt and it would be damaged and it could kill the cactus. So it's like, no, it's a really good metaphor even for us, for thinking about what's going to be the healthy way to get us going on, whether it be our life or a certain project. How do we make sure we don't inadvertently screw up our strengths and what we've got protecting us? And that's when I go on these walks, I have all those crazy little thoughts, which hopefully then turns into blog posts, or hopefully then turns into stories, right? So and that's why I love it. I think there's so much fertile ground for it.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things I love about the book is I can just pick it up and I can say, okay, why I wore corduroy chaps, right? And you think, well, what the heck does that have to do with anything? But it's a couple of pages, makes you think a little bit, and then I can put the book down, and later on I can pick something else up. And I really love that about the book. So what prompted you to put all of this together in a compilation, Lisa?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about the collection for a long time, and I do have some fiction pieces. I have nonfiction essays. I would say most of this book, probably 60 to 70%, are nonfiction essays about previous adventures and experiences. But it never really crystallized what's the glue that holds it all together. And the glue that holds it all together is adventures and misadventures. And then once I realized that, even with my crazy fiction pieces, and some of them are quite crazy, at its core, it's about adventures and misadventures. And then, as you'll read in the introduction, what I thought was worthy of sharing about that is that as we get on later in life, or if we have a health crisis that causes us to reflect on our life, we're going to think about stories and instances and people that matter. And when I think back at the situations and the stories that I not only reflect on myself in terms of reflecting on my life, but if I'm reconnecting with a friend or meeting a new friend, the stories I typically tell people are the ones that are a little off kilter. They're the ones where it was almost a disaster, but I somehow pulled the rabbit out of the hat. Like, that's what you remember. It's not the things that went perfectly well. It's the misadventures in life that we overcome that often are the things that really fuel our remembrances. And so that made me think, well, if I put together a collection that had some examples of those kinds of crazy things, and some of these stories are a little bit embarrassing to me because they sort of show me in a light that I don't necessarily want to be seen in. But what makes them great stories is that somehow, in spite of all of that, maybe momentary stupidity or whatever it was, made it a great adventure. Is that my hope is that when people read these things and they can read that, a little bit of time here or there, that it will inspire them to live and work more adventurously. And I do challenge the readers, or I offer that there's two possible ways they could do it, and then they can do it however they want. One is so I've ordered the pieces from most straightforward to most crazy and weird. And I've suggested, well, if you're used to my more straightforward stuff, start reading at the beginning and stop when it gets too weird for you. If you really prefer my weird stuff, start at the end and read backwards until you get bored. And so that was just a suggestion, but here's just a quick funny story. My sister, who is 13 years older than me, so she's, in her low 70s, she decided to read this book backwards from the weirdest and so this is your older sister who doesn't know all the strange things you've done in life. And so her response back to me was, I had no idea you had such an imagination. And are you sure all of those things are really true? So it was kind of funny. Both my parents have moved on. So she's the most motherly figure in my life. And to sort of hear her be a little, I didn't realize that happened. It was fun.
That is fun. That is fantastic. Well, if for no other reason than to shock your sister, I think it's great that you wrote this book
I
because
agree.
it's super fun. I mean, I will tell you, Lisa, we're not best buddies, but I've read a lot of your work and some of this stuff. I'm like, holy cow, that's really neat. Like not like shock, like bad way, but like shock, like, hey, that's super cool. I really like that, and I love your fiction because it's quick. It hits you and it's quick and you get to it really fast. It's an easy book. I would agree. Far from Ordinary, though, is a perfect title, right? It is a perfect title because there's nothing about it that's ordinary. Just like you, Lisa. I mean this in a beautiful way. Like everything about you is extraordinary. The way you write management, the way you write fiction, and just the way you show up in the world, and especially in my world. You've always been just such a bright light for me. And I just want you to know, I really, really appreciate you.
Okay.
It's fun to spend time with you. I love reading your books because I hear your voice as you read these. And so, yeah, I just want to say thanks and encourage folks to get a copy of this and any of your other books too, because they're so fun, Lisa. Even your management stuff, they're fun. I mean, I would not say your 10 ways to be a more effective manager, which was super helpful for me, by the way, when I was in corporate. But that's maybe not as fun. But everything else is super awesome, super fun, super adventurous. So if you were to give folks some advice for how to be more adventurous, for how they can, whether it's in life or work or play or whatever it is, what would it be, Lisa?
Two things. Every day, sort of ask a what if question. You know, what if I took an hour just to do something that's been on my want to do list? What if I decided for this weekend to take 3 hours for myself to do an artist date? What if I challenged myself to think differently about something? So every day, ask yourself a what if question. But then to make sure that it's going to be a good adventure for you, one of it's always been a guiding principle, and I heard it from Peter Block, who is a best-selling management author, is that make sure the context matches your intentions. In other words, if you're this fun-loving, happy-go-lucky person, do things that are fun-loving and you don't follow someone else's trail. And by the way, this is something, Phil, that you do better than most people. And I know some people find some of what you do, they're like going, wow, how your blogs, your books, everything, you have branding consistency down. And what that means is that nobody's ever going to be surprised by, or if they are, it's because they haven't looked at all of that stuff, right? But when you're trying to create an adventurous life, you want to be brand consistent to yourself. So what my husband wants to do to be adventurous is going to be totally different than what I want to do, because he's got this scientific mind and he'll go into a rabbit hole of research for 4 hours. That will be a great day for him. That would drive me completely up the wall. So you want to ask the what if questions, but you also want to make sure that you're serving whatever's fueling your passion, whatever's fueling your interest, whatever you find you pull into, not what other people think an adventure is. Don't worry about what social media tells you is the best thing you should do. But what do you pull in? What really intrigues you? That's what I would say.
I love that. I love that. Well, folks, if you want to get more from Lisa Haneberg, go to her website, go to lisahaneberg.com, get a copy of Far From Ordinary. It's a lot of little stories, misadventures and adventures and all sorts of cool. It'll be really fun, and get some of her fiction too, especially if you're like me and you don't read a lot of fiction, because there's some great stuff there.
Thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much for spending time with me. I so appreciate you.